This week on Listening to America with Clay Jenkinson, The Survey. My conversation with two media and message consultants, Luke Peterson and Ricky Conry. Luke distributed a survey based on my questions about America at 250. 2,700 people responded. We discussed some of the results of the survey, but also the question of how exactly do I or does anyone else go out to listen to America? How do you check your own bias or avoid what is called confirmation bias? And once you've spent a year or two listening, how do you present what you've learned, in what formats and in what larger historical context? One thing is certain, all people everywhere are storytellers, and the question is how to hear those stories in a way that is useful to the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. All that and more on this week's Listening to America. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Listening to America. I'm joined by two marketing specialists, advisors about how to engage with the public, Luke Peterson of Washington, D.C., and Ricky Conry of Silver Spring, Maryland. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
So, Luke, let's start with you. A couple of months ago, we reconnected, and you offered to do a little survey of the people who are following, listening to America and so on, to try to determine how they're feeling about the United States as we approach our 250th birthday. Tell us a little bit about how you designed your questions.
Clay, I've got sort of unique access. I work for a company called Golan, which works with some of the world's biggest brands and trying to help connect them with consumers and engage with different audiences. And one of the things that we use frequently is opinion surveys, right? So run about 100,000 questions a year to different audiences around the world. If Clay is embarking on this journey to listen to America and understand where we are here at the eve of our 250th birthday, I wonder whether there's a way that we can bring some empirical rigor to this experiment. I wonder if we could use some of the tools that I've got access to explore American attitudes around the state of their democracy, around the things that bring them hope. You know, we brainstormed a little bit about what would the key questions be that we might ask Americans should we have an opportunity to do this. Landed on a draft. So we asked a couple of questions. So first we asked, agree or disagree with these two statements. We, the United States of America, are doing well, but not without some concerns. And then we, the United States of America, are going badly and it may get worse. So we wanted to see the degree to which people agreed or disagreed with either of those things. And then, you know, Clay, I love the formulation that you use. I've heard you drop this casually. We, the United States of America, muddle along, but we get there. And so I thought, let's see how much agreement or disagreement we have with that question as well. We asked about whether Americans feel united, whether they feel like one united country, or whether they feel like they're part of a polarized experience, or whether they feel like they observe polarization, but they don't feel like they really fit either of those poles. We wanted to know where people were coming from. So we had a whole lot of questions around demographics. You know, what's your background? What's your income, gender, educational background, parental status, citizenship. We asked some questions about citizenship. We wanted to know whether you speak English at home or something else. We wanted to know your intention. Were you born in the U.S.? Do you plan to stay in the U.S.? And I'd say, I think most importantly, for what we'll get into in this conversation, is we asked this standard battery of 21 questions called the Schwartz Portrait Value Questionnaire, which helps us understand Americans beyond partisanship, which I think is a trap that a lot of surveyors that look at public opinion get into, especially when you talk about things that have politics. And this is where Ricky's expertise really comes in. So we worked together, Dr. Conry and I, at the State Department when we were trying to understand attitudes of audiences around the world so that we could shape the big leaders of America, the way that we talked about public policy issues because we wanted to make sure that the language we were using and advising our leaders to use aligned with the values and the storytelling frames that were going to be most interesting and engaging to the audiences we were trying to reach.
You approached us, and we were thrilled, of course, to really get some data, to really sort of have a better way of thinking about the thing we're doing. I'm a humanities scholar. I tend to think of it sort of more intuitively, like if my message is clear, somebody wants to hear it. That my duty is to be smart. My duty is to be well prepared, to do the right research, to be historically accurate, to find compelling language to make the arguments that I want to make or ask the questions that I want to make. So I come at it from a very old school perspective, Luke. And so you encouraged me to write out some of the questions I would like to have answered, and I did, and you've recapitulated some of those. But you had to go through and sort of translate them into something that would actually work in a survey, because I don't think that way. And so you clarified them and, to a certain degree, I think, simplified them or took out excess to make them answerable. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there's an art to writing surveys in a way that don't lead the witness. And, this is something that we think about a lot. I'd say that there's also an art to writing surveys that intentionally lead the witness in order to find out how effective your communications might be. And this is something that I also do a lot. So when we're trying to help companies figure out how to position themselves in the market, for example, we may ask a question that deliberately biases the rest of the sample to find out how that affects their perceptions and their thinking. I think one of the things that we watch out for more often than anything else is backlash. So we're trying to identify where a well-intentioned statement may inadvertently trigger an unexpected and very negative response, and trying to cut down on those, right? So we're off on a little bit of a tangent here, but there are lots of ways to use surveys and these online polls that now exist to try and develop insights and strategy and help you craft stories that most effectively connect with and move audiences in the way that you want them to move.
I wasn't aware when I wrote the questions that they were in any way hoping for certain answers. I have a kind of an open-ended view of this. What I'm planning to do over the next few years is to go out and see the country and to listen. And the biggest concern I have at this point is, how do you listen? So if you think of like William Least Teat Moon's book, Blue Highways, he goes to a bar and he sits at the bar and he meets a codger or he meets a bigot or he meets a young idealist or whatever it is. And then later he sort of takes down the gist of that conversation, and then that's what listening to America is. It doesn't seem to me necessarily the right path. How if you really wanted to get the sense of where America is at 250, how are people feeling? What are their anxieties? What are their frustrations? What are they thinking about? Do they plan to celebrate this? Are they even aware of this? What does America mean to them at this point? Does America mean anything to them at this point? I don't know exactly the best way to find that, but I know I want to. And so I want to go in with a strategy for listening, but then you're looking at it also about a strategy for disseminating. So you listen, how do you then take that and package it so that it will have an audience, number one, and that audience will be responsive, will think, well, that's interesting. I wonder how I feel about the military-industrial complex, or I wonder how I feel about America's foreign policy, or I wonder how I feel about our displacement of Native Americans. So I'm interested in figuring out how to really do this project intelligently, authentically. And I will tell you both, just and this sets up Ricky, so welcome, Dr. Conry. It's not that I'm suspicious of the kind of expert work you do. I'm not a bit. But there's a catch, because I think I just need to be authentically me, try to be the smartest person that I can, speak in a language that people actually use, and that if you build a better mousetrap, they will come knocking at your door. But that's not really true. And so, Ricky, you're a data analyst. Talk a little bit about the difference between good intentions and good results.
Oh, that's such a good question. And all of your questions here are good questions. To be afraid because you don't know what it is to listen is the first step to making good product here. I am a media data scientist in particular. At Harmony, we study how audiences take stories on board. And you've said a few things that tell me exactly what audience you're in. And one of them is that you are information forward and you care about being smart, cogent, and well argued. That tells me a lot about who you are and what you care about, what you value. And those are important values. I happen to share them. But they're not the only values you can have and be a really important part of this American story, right? You can have a number of different values. We do not, as Luke said, use politics to organize or thinking about audience, because politics is way downstream of audience. Audiences seek out stories. This is really interesting. So like Christian rock and Metallica both over-index with conservatives, right? But not the same conservatives. You need to know something about what's going on for somebody as an audience, as a story seeker in the world, to understand who is looking at Christian rock and also seeking out, say, the YouTube channel Gaither Vivo, and who's over listening to Metallica and building cars in their basement. Well, probably not their basement, their garage. So at Harmony Labs, we're a nonprofit, and what we do is we just study how people consume the media, and we use an audience focus to do that. It's the challenge that you're going to have is in connecting your audience, whom I think you rep for really well. They too will care about erudition, about scholarship, about history, right? With all of these other values and perspectives and ways of being in a way that is additive, productive, creates a sense of what it is that we're all bringing to the story. And that is really hard to do. But it starts with the perspective that every single person that you talk to out there is doing something in America for America that you can't do. And that's super challenging. So I wish you luck. This is really hard, but you have all the right ideas.
How do we bridge that? How do I find a way to have an ear that's open to something that I'm not yet ready to understand what it's going to be?
That's a good question. Luke's survey showed us that the only humans anybody name in when he asked them open-ended responses about America are presidents. 10% of people out of the box just said, if you could wave a wand today and change something about America, 10% said the president. If I had a magic wand, I would lower grocery prices. But we've done this storytelling so hard and for so long that partisanship is everything that recently at Harmony, we did an analysis of what you read about in the news. 3% of people every day touch climate. 33% see something about Republicans or Democrats. Isn't that interesting? So where I would start that storytelling is with what kind of hero other people want to be. I know exactly from you describing who you are and where you are in the world, the kind of heroism you want to bring to the American story.
We need to take a break. When we come back, I want to ask Ricky a follow-up question and then move a little bit into the survey and get a sense of the results that you've gotten. This is a special edition of Listening to America with Luke Peterson and Ricky Connery about the big project that we're about to embark on, which is to really go out there and listen to America and report back. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Listening to America. I'm talking with Luke Peterson and Ricky Connery about the difference between having a good idea and then making that idea presentable and exciting and provocative and useful to a real audience and not just the one that's my own kind of birthright demographic. You know, I came along in the age of the typewriter. I remember the first time I understood what email was around 1997. I remember seeing websites for the first time around the time of the millennium. I remember my pathetic first cell phone and how they've grown exponentially almost every 6 months since in their capacities. I remember how transportation worked before 9/11 and so on. So I come at it as a sort of classically trained humanities scholar from the second half of the 20th century, that was my formation. And now I'm living in truly a brave new world in which things like TikTok and Instagram and memes and tropes have come to dominate what appears to be our public discourse and have had a revolutionary effect on the way we do almost everything. And I'm one of those people, Ricky, who is, and you're infinitely younger than I am, just so everyone knows. I'm one of those people who I can work my way through a smartphone. I can work my way through websites. I can sign up for subscriptions online. I can do stuff, but I'm by no means intuitive. Whereas my daughter, who's 28 years old, and she can book an Airbnb in Istanbul in 15 seconds, whereas it would take me a couple of hours and I would be uncertain and I wouldn't be sure, is this a scam? In other words, Ricky, that I'm one of those people who's been able to make the turn, but I'm not by any means at home in the world that is now the standard operating principle system of Western civilization. And so I feel like there's a lot I need to learn if I want to connect with people beyond my own demographic.
That's probably true. That's true of all of us. It is not less true of people who are really good at TikTok, that we can all use more learning about how to connect with and build bridges with people who have different perspectives. But I think actually it's not as inaccessible as you imagine. In the survey that you wrote with Luke, you had this really good question, very similar to a question we often ask, which is like, if you were to recommend a book to somebody new to America that explains how this place works, what would it be? It's such a good question. And a ton of people didn't answer it. A ton of people didn't answer it because they don't read books. Which is not that they don't story. So when you guys asked those same people, like, tell me when you feel proud of being in America, tell me where you would take that tourist, show them how we are. Oh gosh, a quarter of people said they would show someone new Washington, D.C. and the monuments. 10% of people spontaneously volunteered that they feel proud on 4th of July. So we're doing a story. Everyone's doing stories. Some of those stories are happening on TikTok. Some of them are happening in books. And a true audience actually links together what they choose in books, what they choose on TV, and so on to help reinforce and tell their story. So what you want to do when you're out there is exactly what you intuited doing with that question, which is just ask people something about the stories they're living in. And you will, I did a big statistical analysis on Luke's survey results, you will find actually that there is a tremendously widespread core narrative of Americanness. This is not the case for every kind of issue. There is actually a set of beliefs about our settings, our heroes, our conflicts, and even a little, we could use more, the resolutions to those conflicts that is broadly shared across audiences. There are big differences too, but I think you can go into every conversation looking for information about what story people are living here.
I love the idea of story. When Steinbeck won his Nobel Prize for Literature in 1962, and he gave a great acceptance speech, he said, story is the thing. Story is what humans do. That from the beginning of time, before there was language, before there certainly was writing, people told stories. How I just barely escaped being crushed by the mammoth. The woman that I love married the guy in the other cave, that from the very beginning, humans were storytelling creatures. That's maybe the definition of who we are. And that all that has changed is that the technologies of stories have changed over time until now we're in a period of breathtaking, revolutionary change in the way that story happens. And I'm old school, Ricky. I think if it's valuable, it's in a book. If it's valuable, it must be in linear discourse. And I know that's not true. It's never been true that, millions and millions and millions of people per day in America are telling stories, and only a fraction of them see life through books at all. So it's important to have a really ecumenical notion of how story gets told, isn't it?
Yes. And actually, Neil Gaiman has this lovely thing that he says about how stories work. Stories are symbiotic with us. They are the things that we have used since the dawn of humanity to become more than just one person. And it's so good. It's so good. Stories make meaning out of suffering, and they are the only way you can co-create democracy. And the thing about story that's special that we talk about all the time, it's different from message, which is what people want to do. They want to give you instruction to, sorry, Luke, buy the toothpaste or vote for the candidate or whatever. A story has movement. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It goes. And so that is one of the things I'm super curious about. What you learn is how people do or don't envision that future, because you don't have to convince them today that your issue or your position is right. You don't have to sell them a book. I actually think that books are going to come back because essentially, as Neil Gaiman tells me, Douglas Adams said, nothing is better at being a book than a book, which is really good. There's just a whole really good set of quotes in there. But I think that the interesting question we can be asking each other is, where are we going to go together? How are we going to grow this thing together?
So, Ricky, I want to turn back to Luke here in a minute, but before I do, you said that one of the things that was sort of interesting about the survey is that people, a relatively large number of people, had a sense of a narrative, of an idea of what America is. If you had to put that in an absolute nutshell, what would you say you learned?
Home. 15% of people, when asked what America means to them, just spontaneously said home. Now, 15% isn't like a majority or anything, but when you give people a blank box and ask them to put something in, 15% is a lot. So what you're starting with is a shared belief about the setting in which this story takes place. We did not get a whole bunch of people coming back and being like, I'm moving to Canada or anything like that. And even Luke, you asked about, do you intend to stay here? The answer is overwhelmingly absolutely, right? So that means that we have a lot of conflicts. There were shared beliefs about what those conflicts were, and most of the ones that we share a belief about are about danger. Luke, you can talk about that in a minute. There are not good shared beliefs about who the heroes of this story are, as I mentioned. We don't have a good shared belief about how the story is moving. What we have instead is widespread malaise, or kind of a sense that we somewhat agree that something is wrong. But the setting is important because you're doing a place-based storytelling tour. And so you have the power to call on place in your storytelling.
All right, that's really fascinating, all of this. As we approach the 250th birthday, that one of the characteristics we found in our survey, your survey, is that there is a sense of malaise, that's unease, something's not right, something's not quite what we dreamed of, that we still have great things, home, consumerism, mobility, lots of freedoms, but something went wrong. Something's not right. That's hard to get at, but that you did discern that in this study.
I'd say a lot of people had a lot of different things to share about ways they would find America to be more perfect, right? And you asked it. That was the first question we asked once we got to the open-end part of the survey was, if you could wave a magic wand and change something, what would it be? So we really cracked people's consciousness, and they gave us, maybe the first thing that popped into their mind, maybe they spent some time with it, produced a very thoughtful answer. But we did get answers from about 2,700 Americans, most of which were quite revealing. There were a handful of people who said, I would change nothing, America's perfect for me. But a handful out of, 2,700 respondents. And I think one of the things that's a challenge here for you, for this program, and, maybe a little bit for us at this point in our experiment, is we all have our own stories. And, in a media environment where maybe 20 years ago you had not so many stories to choose from, we all kind of picked, from a handful of stations that were showing a TV show at 8 o'clock at night, or maybe, Clay, you pull one of the tens of thousands of books off your shelf and decide what you want to settle down with for the evening and make your experience fit the narrative that you've selected, and then talk with your friends and colleagues and communities about how you collectively or maybe uniquely experience those stories. Now, through things like Instagram and TikTok and blogs and the internet, streaming, and the 900 channels I have on my cable package, I can pick a story that is pretty finely tuned to reflect the worldview that I have and derive joy from seeing reflected back at me. We still have a lot of people who come together and watch the Super Bowl in real time. State of the Union's another one, convention speeches. One of the things that was so interesting that I found in these open-ended responses, there was a question that asks, when do you feel most American? And one of the very common answers was when we all come together after a tragedy.
So 9/11 occurs, suddenly there's a moment.
Or after Katrina, or after a tornado hit my town, I felt like an American because people came together with me and we rebuilt our community. When bad things happen, we do tend to experience them together in real time. I had this thought that if you were truly interested in catching people in moments when they feel their American identity most, you should contemplate whether you need to be something of a storm chaser and go places where you're in the 24 to 72 hours aftermath of a real human tragedy, and catch people when they're picking up the pieces of their neighbors' homes. That is the kind of moment that an awful lot of these respondents said was the moment when they felt their American identity.
I certainly will have that opportunity if I tour the country about half the time for the next 6 or 7 years. I think you can appreciate, however, Luke, that when you're hauling an airstream, you're not looking for the hailstorm particularly. You're wanting to kind of avoid the high winds and the black ice on the roads and the tornado and the hailstorm. But in any given year, there are catastrophes, localized catastrophes all over the country, and FEMA comes in and the president declares them to be a disaster zone, and special funds are made available. I certainly want to see that, but I also want to see some other things that I would sort of call moral emergencies. So, for example, I would really like to go spend a weekend with a militia group in northern Michigan. I would like to go to a fundamentalist Pentecostal tent revival in Alabama. And I would like to go to, as close as you can get to a Lakota Sundance Festival. But I won't use the word infiltrate because I don't like the feel of that. But to try to edge near some of these phenomena that are definitely American phenomena, and to listen carefully and to observe respectfully. This is my philosophy, and you tell me if it's right or wrong, that we cannot heal this country unless we give agency and respect to points of view that are radically bewildering to us.
I think that's a very good perspective. I think that you, in using place to organize your thinking, can make yourself a guest, obviously with permission in these spaces, and you can understand better what story work these things are doing for folks. What does it mean for you to experience worship in that way? What does it mean for you to be in community dancing in that way? And because it's not doing the story work that you find so meaningful and important to you, which presumably is in an armchair reading a good book, right? But there's important story work that's taking place for people in those spaces, and the power of freedom, which is the other big thing that people mentioned in Luke's survey, is that we are free to pursue the stories we want to live for ourselves. Comprehending how they can all fit together is the work of democracy. And are you going to heal it today? No. But it is the work we took on 250 years ago, and we will be struggling with 250 years from now. Understanding how to do the work together is more important than solving the problem.
I'm not departing on this mission away from my comfortable reading chair with any notion that I could do any healing. But I do hope that at the end of this, I can produce a series of, let's call them publications, very broadly defined, that people will turn to and say, yes, that helps. That helps me understand where America is at 250. There's some interesting perspectives there. There's some interesting, maybe some insights there. There's an attempt to synthesize in a careful and responsible way there. That this not just book, but this book, these posts, these videos, these interviews help me make sense of America at a time when we are feeling malaise and are feeling bewilderment. But I know this: if I go into a new community, let's say I drive my Airstream to a campground in Wisconsin Dells, the Fred Flintstone campground in RV park in Wisconsin Dells, and it's 5:00 and I start wandering around. I sit at my picnic table or their picnic table with perfect strangers. I'm not going to start by saying Lenin and Trotsky had this view of America. I mean, if you want to have a conversation, you can't just dive into what went wrong with America, or how are we going to get out of this mess, or how do you feel about America? There has to be an intelligent path in, right?
I would encourage you to become as cognizant as possible about your own biases and the worldview that has been shaped by your own experience that you bring to all those interactions, and especially in the way that you represent the things that you find in others. A lot of people use their own experience as a shortcut to try to understand the actions and the speech of others without really digging in deep to understand the values that shape those experiences and that are really at the foundation of the words that you hear. I've done this on a professional level for about a decade, where either in my government role, where not only was I meant to be professionally politically objective in a partisan perspective, right? I served under the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, quite politically charged leadership who all had a particular point of view. And my job was to bring them the truth and perspectives about people tens of thousands of miles away with whom I have very little shared experience. So for me to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting the point of view and motivations of Egyptians, for example, and how a group of business owners might have responded to a particular survey, or what was behind answers to a particular focus group series of questions that we might have asked. I had to work real hard to know what was under their, what was behind their words, right? And it takes a lot more than what I feel like a lot of people who have been on your path have attempted. I think in particular, I love John Steinbeck. I have mixed feelings about Travels with Charlie, which is another, similar, let's travel around America, get people's stories. He absolutely brought his point of view and a pretty strong political bias to the way that he was representing the people he was running into and whose stories he was retelling. And, it was exactly right, probably, to sell books to the audience that wanted to read him. I guess I say all that to say, Clay, you have a particular experience and point of view and set of values and interests that have brought you your audience. You have a lot of people who listen to you, people who travel around the world with you and want to hear what you have to say about stuff. The opportunity that you have, and thing that I'm so excited to see unfurl over the next couple of years, is how you can help bring a multidimensional persona and connection to the audience that you've already got that authentically represents the people that you meet while you're on the road.
We got to take a break here, so that's a good place to put it, how to position oneself authentically and yet effectively in a world that's increasingly digitized. So we'll take a short break. This is a special edition of Listening to America. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Listening to America. Really fascinating conversation with new friends who really want to help us succeed in this project of Listening to America. One of the things that happened to John Steinbeck, Luke, is that he traveled around the country and he didn't really do much listening. And he was used to being the author. He was a famous author. People listened to him. He didn't have to listen to anybody at this point in his life. So in a certain sense, he fudged this journey in 1960, which has been great because I've been studying it backwards and forwards and reading books about it and reading books about it. And so I know a lot now about what went wrong. And howbeit, I shouldn't, as a mere obscure humanities scholar, be saying, oh, Steinbeck failed. It's not for me to say that, but I do think he did, in many respects, miss his opportunity. He then went away and wrote a charming book about it. All you really need to do to be a good listener is to shut up and listen and make sure they see that you're listening and that you're asking the follow-up questions which show that you're not just a recording angel here. You're also engaged in a real dialogue with real people, and you're not hiding yourself. You're not posturing in any way. You're authentic, but you are curious. But you're not simply buying it. You're not simply saying, fair enough, I guess that's America. So that's the approach that I've used for years. It's worked very well for me. I don't know if it will continue to work well, but that's how I would do it in the absence of any expertise.
When we think about how to open people up in a survey context, I usually start by asking a set of questions to a respondent, like, do you generally agree or disagree with the following statement? I seek adventure in my life. I love taking risks, right? And you can start to see how stories come together based on people's values and the experience that they've carried through into their lives.
So, Luke, let's go to the survey just a little, sort of what you learned from a very preliminary survey of about just under 3,000 people.
Sure. So just at the top, this is a roughly representative survey. We talked to people aged 18 to 99, good mix of self-described ethnicity, education. About 60% of our respondents have less than a bachelor's degree. About 40% have a bachelor's or above. Broad range of income. About 42% of the respondents work full-time. About 62% of the respondents have no children, and the other 38% have one or many. And again, it's not representative of all American experiences, because what we were interested in getting for this survey was a broad collective of responses, right? So we wanted to hear as many different kinds of people's stories as we could possibly get, so that we could start to identify places where those stories were coming together and identities were converging. So about 95% of the audience were born the respondents were born in the U.S. and say they're U.S. citizens. People who were younger were more likely to say that they weren't. About 15% were dual nationals or non-citizens but live here in the U.S. About 80% say their parents were born in the U.S. 70% say their grandparents were born in the U.S. Most said that they primarily speak English at home, which is because we ran the survey in English, and if we wanted something else, we would have done it in a different language. About 80% of the respondents said that they intended to live in the U.S. permanently, like very strongly convinced, and about 10% of respondents said that they intend to leave the U.S. and eventually live elsewhere. When we think about Ricky's quadrants that she just introduced, about 20 to 30% of Americans fell into one of those four buckets, or each one of those four buckets. So the smallest one was 21% for the people power group. The biggest one was 32% for the if you say so group. Tough cookies and don't tread on me were right in the middle. So I'd say top learnings. As we approach the country's 250th birthday, Americans are concerned. A healthy majority do think we're at risk of losing our democracy, but it was like a soft degree, People are not alarmed. They're mildly concerned, which is in fact concerning to me, right? It seems like the kind of thing that if you have a small amount of concern for it, you should have a tremendous amount of concern for it. So that was troubling. One thing that was interesting is that when we looked into the demographics of people who said that they were concerned, the more marginalized you are, income, ethnicity, education, if you're living on the margins, you're more likely to be concerned about the state of our country. Many more people feel divided than feel united. Most people would see division as polarized into at least two Americas. But those more marginalized groups, interestingly, would say maybe it's more than two Americas, right? It seems like there's the sort of the red team and the blue team, and then I'm on neither of those teams, but I also don't necessarily feel like my experience matches everybody else who doesn't fit on one of those two teams. So more of like a fractionalized rather than a polarized America. Your formulation, we muddle along, but we'll get there, gets a lot of support. That was one of the statements that people agreed with the most, but people don't have a lot of conviction in their agreement with that statement, So I think people would sort of roughly say, we're concerned about the future of our country, but also we have some confidence that we'll get there eventually, which is interesting. So, we mentioned when we're recording this in time, yesterday in the afternoon before the State of the Union, I was at a little event with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who basically said that on stage. Like, I have some concerns about our country, but I have every confidence that we'll figure it out. It might be kind of bumpy, but we'll get there. And I was just sort of thinking about that in the context of this conversation. It's interesting that
doesn't he have to say that? I mean, isn't that required? Isn't that the most alarmed thing that someone like Mike Pompeo can say? He's not talking as a citizen writing a letter to the editor or posting something as an anonymous individual. He's an important public figure talking in a public way about America.
To some extent, you're right, but also he's out of office and he's in the minority. So if you think about what's most politically expedient for him, it's probably not that, right? It's like, ring the alarm, we got to throw the bums out. So to see him kind of shrug and say, yeah, we have a lot of problems, we have a lot of issues, they're complicated. They're a lot more complicated than are easily explainable in a soundbite. And from his perch as a former CIA director, as former Secretary of State, it's like, can't even talk about most of the complexities within the issues that he's seeing. So yeah, and I don't want to put words in the Secretary's mouth, but I just thought that was sort of an interesting observation. So when we think about Ricky mentioned that when we ask about what does America represent to you, it represents home. One of the things that we saw also, people would say freedom. People would say America represents a way of life, or they describe it as some sort of like America as like a set of shared values. But if you peel those three things, so way of life, shared values, and freedom, peel off one layer and look for agreement, and it's not there, right? People agree that America represents their way of life, but what America means in terms of a way of life is profoundly diverse, depending on who you speak with.
And basing on geography and class and race and gender and orientation.
Yeah, this is where this values quadrant comes in. That's why those questions are important. Finding out where people sit and what's important to them tells a big story about how they see America, help or hinder. One of the things that I found interesting, so we think about sort of the Maslow's hierarchy, when respondents were more likely to talk about, when we asked what's the biggest problem in America today, if the thing that they had to say was something about security, economic security or physical security, their overall point of view was a lot bleaker, I guess, in that they feel like there is some large systemic issue that is creating an existential threat to them that, to Ricky's earlier point, perhaps it is on the system to solve or on just the president to solve. Right? Could you talk more about that, Ricky? Because you went deep in this.
Yeah, let me add to it because I went really deep, and I want to clarify the word security because I think you're using it in a Maslow's hierarchy way, and so we should clarify that on the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy is this idea that like we want to meet some pretty basic needs before we start talking about other stuff. And those basic needs are like, I would like some shelter and some food, and so that is what Luke is meaning by security, not necessarily national security as it gets framed in an issue context. And what we found was that to add to that, the things that everyone agrees across all the audiences are issues of interest, like important, are crime and money, cost of living, prices. And sometimes people use this phrase, the economy, but when people use that, they really mean whether or not they feel like they can pay for stuff. And those are the things that everybody, when they're alarmed about them, that's not audience specific. The things that are more audience specific from this particular analysis are things like immigration, political polarization. Those belong to specific neighborhoods in the audience map. Healthcare and racism as concerns belong to specific audiences. But one thing we can agree on is that the core conflicts that we face in the United States have to do with these very basic needs: safety, physical safety, and safety from crime, and the access to money, which is access to all those other things, housing and food.
So this is, not to get political, but this is good news for Donald Trump. If there's a predominance of concern about crime, an out-of-control border, inflation, those are really good points for somebody in opposition, whoever it is, to the current administration to say they failed because you're less secure. Your milk is costing more. The crime is up. Now, these can all be deconstructed by evidence, but if I were an opposition group, if I were a Republican, I'd be saying this is good news because the expression of those concerns can be used to wedge out one group of people and replace them.
Actually, so the survey here doesn't suggest these are like higher than normal or anything like that. What it does suggest is that it's easy to alert virtually every audience with stories about these. So if you want to access any audience in America and you start talking about the cost of eggs, which I keep mentioning because it is astronomical and it's really a concern for people.
Eggs.
Eggs, yeah. A big bird flu last year led to a rise in the cost of a dozen eggs to $8 or more. And for people who rely on that as a primary protein source, that was a significant drain on their wallets. It's a very real thing that's happening for people. And so if you are a political communicator and you want access to, just without respect to which kind of group, you can talk about the cost of eggs and get their attention. So I don't know that it's a particularly good news for any particular candidate, but it is a strategy I see candidates using.
The old adage, it's the economy, stupid, right? I mean, I think it goes back a very long time where you see whichever party is in power has a bit of a handicap, right? There's a pendulum. You know, you think about, a lot of people think about the polarized electorate, right? Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other, and then people who are undecided are kind of in the middle. So I have a couple of bones to pick about the way that that's organized. I think it's a dramatic oversimplification. What happens is you have a lot of people in America who will always and consistently vote against whoever they see as having power because they aren't getting what makes them feel like whole people, or they're not getting what they need. So it's somebody else's fault. Throw the bums out. Always. Doesn't matter who the bums are, right? Like I vote for one person this election, and then I'm going to vote for the person who's out of office the next election against the person who's in, because I still am not where I want to be in life. You have other people who are absolutely locked in to one party set of preferences or another, but that is consistently shrinking as a percentage of the overall American electorate for one party or the other. We've seen that going down over time. I think Pew and Gallup put out a new report every year about how far down party ID has gotten election over election. And then you have a bunch of other buckets of cohesive ideologies where people feel like they have some strong points of view that occasionally overlap with the things that are being said by major parties in power. But, you know, what we're talking about here is, I think your supposition was what, that because people are saying that they can't afford stuff, that it's a good thing for the Trump administration or for the Trump campaign. I would say those are the same people often whose difficult experience 3 years ago was a good thing for the Biden campaign, right? Like it's a static feature of the system.
Right. That makes perfect sense. So you did this survey, almost 3,000 people, which is a lot. I was delighted by that. What surprised you, Luke?
You know, the question, we talked about this a minute ago about where people feel like they experience their identity. And the couple of places that stuck out, one was when there's a time of crisis, when we all come together. The other, and I guess this makes sense when I sort of wrap my head around it, but when I'm traveling, when I'm outside the country, I feel most American. And I was thinking about that in the context of your program, and I know you go overseas pretty often. Are you planning on spending some time trying to encounter Americans who are not part of your tour group while you're on the road and asking them, you know, so how is it stumbling around these ruins? You know, tell me about how you ended up here, and why don't you answer this short questionnaire that I have for you about whether it's more important to you to be a leader or unique, so that we can.
I'm not very good at that, you know, having read about and witnessed the ugly America, the kind of the American abroad. I work really hard never to be that guy. So I lower my voice, I change my body language, I listen more and ask less. And of course, I'm often hurting the 20-some people that I'm with too. But, you know, but in this course I'm about to teach, starting tomorrow actually, an online course, America at 250, the first of two books that I assigned was Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, which is the greatest book ever written about us by somebody who was not an American. But that just, Ricky, that just shows What an old fossil I am, right? I mean, my idea of looking at how to think about America 250 is to start with Alexis de Tocqueville. Now I'm in a pretty small subset of Americans who want to start that way.
Well, everybody wants to start from where they started, right? If I were to construct listening to America in a way that really resonates with the audience, it would actually be to connect all of those lessons to the ways that to the big problems and questions we have now. And the thing that's missing from the narrative that I wasn't surprised by in the survey, but I was really disappointed to see, is that people will give you shared elements of core narrative, including tone, texture, character, story, and the setting. And there are some problems with some of those things that make it hard for us to move forward. Nobody knows where we're going. Nobody can volunteer to us what the destination is. And I do actually think you have a unique perspective that helps, whether it's book-based or not, helps us set some of these problems in context, because we've done some of this before. We have, in fact, gotten here through 250 years, and a lot of stuff has changed, and a lot of stuff has gotten legitimately better. So what would be really fun is to have these conversations with people in their moment, in their audience, from their perspective, what they want, the problems they perceive, and then to zoom out and take some studio time and bring Alexis de Tocqueville to bear. Like, what I observed from our history is that people who have looked at us from the outside have always thought X and Y and Z. And where we are going, which is the missing piece of the story, even for me, is here. This is how we can go forward.
So, Ricky, Luke, this is just the beginning of what I hope will be a very fruitful series of conversations. But to our audience, let me say we'll see you all next week for another important edition of Listening to America.